Hey everyone, super excited for today's shows. I'm jumping back. I think a lot of you have noticed on our podcast channel, my partner Raymond Guns is doing a lot of our podcasts now, but I wanted to jump in on this one. I invited Aaron Smith, co-founder and CEO of the National Cannabis Industry Association, which we all lovingly call NCIA. It's the largest trade association representing legal cannabis in the U.S. I think it's been around the longest as well. Aaron's been a huge public advocate for cannabis policy reform, both in California and nationally. So I'm going to let you, Aaron, fill in any more blanks on your role, and maybe real quickly, and we'll cover at the end as well what your current initiatives are at NCIA, and then we'll definitely have all your links and whatever so people can get involved. This is a movement, and I don't if literally you as a one person behind NCIA, if you had not done this, where would we be? We might be way. There might not be 47 states or whatever. So jump in and give us a little more background, and then we'll dive into what's going on in the current world.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be with you as always, and with the dope CFO audience. Just love to have this opportunity to connect with everybody. And you said it. You hit the nail on the head there. This is a movement. There are plenty of business opportunities in cannabis, but first and foremost, what we're trying to do here is kind of a monumental task of undoing decades and decades of prohibition policy and replacing that with regulations and a flourishing one day industry in this country. And that's taken a lot of work, and not just by no means, not just by me, but from hundreds of people that came before me and that are still at it today. It takes organizing, it takes lobbying, it takes grassroots work to make change, whether it be at the state level and at the national level. And that's what NCIA is about. We channel the resources of the cannabis industry, specifically small businesses that don't have the ability to hire their own federal lobbyists, but can be a part of a larger association where we can pull resources, have a full-time presence in Washington, D.C., to speak for the industry, to make sure that we're continuing to push those important issues forward in front of members of Congress, the administration, and ultimately bring about a day where the cannabis industry is treated fairly like any other highly regulated industry as it is in many of the states, but at the federal level. And so, yeah, I look forward to talking about what's happening in DC and beyond, and how folks can get involved.
Well, awesome. That's a great intro. And maybe I was thinking as a quick backdrop, and we'll work our way into, I'd like to discuss December 2nd hearing a little bit, and then move into what all the crap that's happened in January. And then maybe as a backdrop, I often, this was something I didn't know, but it's like there are many paths to legalization in our country, which is kind of cool. Someone said once, like, our government's good when we're really divided on an issue, like an issue's 50-50, it's really hard to make change. And sometimes that's good. But if we get really one-sided where 8 out of 10 Americans, kind of like we are on cannabis, things move more quickly. And I think that's what we saw really the last decade. And so I always, in my head at this point, it's like, okay, there are kind of four paths to legalization, which is first and foremost the states, cities, and counties. That movement has just flourished I mean, we've been through, I say, different administrations, red states, blue states, COVID, doesn't matter. It just went forward. It's still going forward today. And then we had Congress. We got really close with the MORE Act, and I know we had the House pass it twice. President would have signed, failed in the Senate, but I don't think we were many votes away. That was very close. The Supreme Court, I know, has threatened to get involved, and maybe they can um, take initiatives themselves. And then finally, I always thought the lowest probability was DEA because they've been so anti-cannabis. But that's kind of what we're talking about today, because that's where we've been through this 2 year process. And maybe, do you want to just give before we jump into this December 2nd hearing, give us kind of a quick backdrop of that last couple of years? So people, and when you bring up HHS department, maybe explain what the heck that is, because I didn't even know what HHS was.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's we're making a lot of progress, but it does seem excruciatingly slow. Certainly to folks that are, looking at it from just looking at the last year or couple of years, because this has been a very long process. But if we, back up here, we'll go all the way back to 1970, the Controlled Substances Act. That's the federal law that governs all controlled substances, drugs, across the board, and medicines and illegal substances. Cannabis has been Schedule One, and the way that the legislation works is you have Schedule One through five, and these are kind of varying degrees of danger in a sense. And Schedule One drug is classified as having no medicinal value and a high potential for abuse, and that's a drug like heroin, LSDs in there. These are drugs that the federal government has just deemed are have a high potential for abuse, no medical value. Schedule two, for example, would be high potential for abuse and limited medical value, and then down the line, Schedule two drugs are drugs like fentanyl and cocaine, are actually less restrictive than where marijuana is today. So while everybody knows cannabis has a many potential medicinal qualities, and there's a pile of evidence showing that it's taken a long time to get to where we're at, to where now we actually have HHS, the Health and Human Services Administration, has at the direction of the Biden administration, going 2+ years back, has conducted a thorough analysis of the cannabis's medicinal value, abuse potential relative to other substances, and then to determine whether Schedule One classification is appropriate. They came back about a year ago and cited a ton of evidence that many already knew had been
Yeah.
there had been in existence for many years, decades, in fact, and stated that cannabis really, in fact, does not belong in Schedule One, should belong in Schedule Three. So Schedule Three is where this is a high potential for abuse drug, but with medicinal value, and that um, Marinol is in that category, for example, which is an artificial THC. Ketamine is there, anabolic steroids. So these aren't legal, these aren't legal drugs, but they are more readily available with prescription through pharmacy. And so the way that the Controlled Substances Act is constructed, the DEA has there's two different bodies that can change the scheduling of a drug. One would be Congress; they could change it through a law. Two would be the DEA, so they have the authority to move cannabis from Schedule One, Two, Three, Five, or actually remove it or move it the other way. Well, you can't go the other way with
Yeah.
cannabis, but so the HHS does not have the authority to actually change the scheduling of the drug, but they recommended to DEA that they do so. And so DEA set out on this process, and which involved setting up a series of hearings where they hear from kind of both sides where cannabis should be, and that's kind of brings us to the December 2nd hearing, which is where we kind of
Yeah.
set off that process, and uh,
Well,
and it's certainly been a wild ride getting there, and there's a lot more that we need to do.
yeah. So as we get up to that December 2nd, and I know it is interesting how the HHS, which is a huge department, and there's definitely people that have influence, whoever is the head of these different agencies. And so a couple of parts about that. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think if in the past when the HHS has recommended something from doing a couple of years of research, I think most or all the times DEA's accepted their recommendation. So it would be highly unusual for DEA after that 2 year study. I think on top of that, even before we get to the hearings, the FDA, and that's our agency to monitor foods and drugs, said they agreed too. It belongs in Schedule 3. And then finally, the public, 93% of the public, when they opened it for public comment. And so when we arrived at December 2nd for that hearing, and again, this hearing that was going to be run by a judge, well, this is interesting me too, one single human being, um, who's no jury or whatever. He's going to run a very tight knit or whatever hearing. Um, and at the end of that hearing, maybe we start there. What could the judge do? Say we have the hearing and we conclude it. Can the judge say, yes, it's on Schedule 3, or does he just come up with a recommendation based on what he
So
hears?
yeah, I mean that's a really good question. So that the judge would actually they have a non-binding ruling that says yes, we think this should be moved to Schedule 3, or no, it shouldn't, or whatever the judge determines. And so and then it's still up to DEA to make the decision what to do. And this is really a problem in the underlying structure of our drug laws that go, dating back to the Nixon administration, is that you have HHS and FDA. These are medical organizations within the government that have the ability to weigh in on their opinion on where drugs should be, but it's actually up to DEA, which is a law enforcement
Yeah.
agency, to make the determination. And it really makes no sense because law enforcement agencies are there to enforce the laws. They shouldn't be making the laws. That should be up to Congress, or and if it's going to be up to a regulatory body in the administration, it should be up to the scientists, the medical professionals. So that's an underlying
Yeah,
problem that's
that's
been there for decades and decades.
yeah,
So
and that's just crazy to think about that the DEA, who the enforcers, they're saying yes or no. It should have just been HHS. So we get
and
into December
So
2nd.
well, I'll say just to the ruling now. So the two in the past, it's important to know that two times an administrative law judge has already recommended cannabis be moved out of Schedule 1. Through the years, there have been petitions lodged by private citizens and organizations. Normal, for example, Americans for Safe Access, have pushed these petitions and got to the point where the judge actually, made a ruling that said you should move cannabis out of Schedule 1, and the DEA just ignored it. But this is a very unique situation because the DEA is the proponent in these hearings. The DEA is actually proposing the change, and it's up to opponents to try to shoot that down and say that cannabis shouldn't be removed from Schedule 1. So that's never happened, and it's being it was pushed at the behest of the president, the former president at this point.
Yeah, and that to me, there's a couple super interesting things. And for one, and I've recommended to people, go on YouTube and type in DEA, and you can go listen to the December 2nd hearing yourself. I thought it was I thought it was very entertaining. I thought the judge actually seemed like a pretty rational guy, no nonsense guy. I was like, yeah, we're going to get through this quickly. Um, and then we had also the change in administration. And so obviously, you have the head of these agencies. So now we're looking at RFK is right on the border of maybe or maybe not getting approved on HHS. He's been a good advocate for cannabis in the past. He said, I guess yesterday, that he was just going to go with whatever the DEA said. And I'm like, what? You got what the heck, man? You're pro cannabis. You're the health. You should be telling what you just said. Hey, you idiots at DEA, you're not medical people. Let's put this on Schedule 3. I don't know if he just said that to get past, and then we don't really know who's going to be the head of the DEA right now. So that person's gonna. But before we even get to that stuff, because so we have this change of administration. People aren't even sworn in as whatever they're going to be run on. I think we've talked about this in the past, that Trump mildly for cannabis, but it's just so low on his priority list that he's not going to get involved. Pam Bondi, we have no idea. She's going to be the attorney general, and she is now, I guess. And she said, didn't really say what she was going to do. So we get to the December 2nd, and when I read between the lines, and this is where it gets really confusing, and so he gave a lot of the groundworks of how this hearing is going to happen, and it's going to be pretty quick, and there's 10 or 15 witnesses, and they're all going to get like 2 hours, and it's not going to go on for years and years. It's like this is a really fine-tuned short hearing. But then he said, let's bring up each witness to kind of say what you're going to say. And the DEA was the first one. And he asked right off the bat, he said, let's cut to the chase. Are you going to be arguing for moving Schedule 3 or against? And the DEA said for. And so I'm thinking, oh, this is awesome. The DEA is for it. but of course nothing's as simple as it seems. And so other groups started arguing, the same December 2nd hearing, like, oh no, wait a minute, we're maybe gonna put a stay because DEA is playing games and they're pretending they're for it, but they're not really for it. And so maybe walk us through that because I when I heard the original YouTube, I was really optimistic. I was like, oh, this is a no nonsense guy. But now I'm not so sure.
Yeah, so it's there's a lot of uncertainty right now because the hearings have been indefinitely postponed. There was a stay granted to some of the other village farms and veterans, no, a veterans group that is involved in the process, and these were um, a company that was actually on the side of rescheduling that had uncovered some saw that the DEA is there's definitely bias at DEA. These again, this is a law enforcement agency that has been enforcing prohibition for decades. So there's clearly when you look at the briefings that they were filing, they were filing a lot of negative um, data around cannabis. And there was also it was uncovered that they had been potentially having conversations with Project Sam apart from the hearing. So it was ex parte communications that were inappropriate. And Project Sam is a prohibitionist group that's opposing rescheduling. So these companies or their lawyers anyway had decided that they thought it was better to just delay this whole thing rather than move forward because they were fearing that DEA was going to come out and somehow hijack the process or sabotage the process. I guess I mean to say. So we're now the problem and I'll say that this is a in our mind a very misguided strategy. NCIA did not support this strategy. We think that this was very bad decision in our lawyers can get into more in depth. We've had a couple of different webinars over on our platform on with our attorneys discussing this, but this was something that we did not want to see happen, but did happen. And because right now it's the DEA that they want to appeal to the DEA saying, hey, DEA, you're too biased to be the advocate for this. We want to be the advocate for this in these hearings. Well, that's not the way that it works. This is a DEA court.
Well, and so before we go farther, I mean, this is where it gets really confusing because the DEA came in December 2nd, said they're really for cannabis. But then these other groups that were supposedly for rescheduling, they're the ones that blocked it. This is where it gets confusing. Um, and and so they indefinitely stayed the hearings. And so then we come back to like, wait a minute, whose side or is, and it's really confusing because we don't know what the DA was going to do on the one hand. Maybe they were actually right to put a stay on
Mhm.
the hearing, but on the other hand, because when on the December 2nd hearing, when they brought that up, I read between the lines, the judge to me was saying, and even some of the things I read that he wrote was like, yeah, you can get these hearings stayed or whatever, but do you really want to? He's like, to me, he was hinting that you're being
Yeah.
really stupid. He was saying, you should just let me go through this hearing because my read of him was there was no chance he was going to go against HHS and FDA and all these groups and the public and say, oh, wait a minute, I'm one human being. I think I'm going to ignore all that stuff and say, no, it doesn't belong in Schedule 3. And so I think he was between the lines telling that guy, that's a really bad idea. We should just have this hearing. And
Yeah, I mean, it was almost not even between the lines. I mean,
yeah, it was like,
it was pretty straightforward, and it's an unfortunate situation. And I don't like to um, incite kind of infighting in the movement or whatever, but it really shows that you have these, these are companies that have spent millions of dollars on lawyers that are telling them to do this, and I think are really misguided. Here's NCIA. We were actually the only organization granted standing by that judge, but they were still allowed to participate. And so what that meant was that our word carried a little bit more water in the process. but they still had the ability to participate as designated participants along with NCIA. So, it's questionable to us whether organizations that didn't even have standing to begin with would have the ability to derail the hearings as they did when there's, when we completely didn't want that. So, we're looking at all
Is there
options. But right now, where things stand is we don't, we've got probably 30 day, or I'm sorry, 90 days from, which is now 60 days from that ruling before we even hear an answer. And the answer might be, oh, we're going to punt this another 90 days. So there's really a lot of it's all going to come down to what the Trump administration decides to do, and if they want to prioritize getting this back on track. And what we're asking is that, these hearings actually never needed to take place. They could have just fast tracked this past the hearings, bypassed the hearings, had moved it to reschedule. I think there's a lot of good reason why they did. They just decided not to do that, but from our perspective, it's not necessary, and we can and will try to get things back on track in a more expeditious manner.
is there so maybe we talk about that now. So the hearing stayed. Is there so we're waiting to hear back. So they filed the stay 90 days. We're waiting to hear back from the DEA in 90 days. And
Yep.
then is, say, the new DEA person is totally anti-cannabis, what power do they have to just be like, oh, I'm going to ignore all this?
Unfortunately, all the power. That's why this was a very foolish move on the part of Village Farms and these other advocates that because they've stayed these proceedings, but it's being appealed to the DEA, in which the same DEA which they say is biased. And yes, we agree with them that the DEA is biased, of course, and that there's probably a lot of tension within the agency as to whether or not they want to really do this. Um, so yeah, so I think that it's going, the good news, or it could be good news anyway, is that, I think whoever the next DEA administrator and Pam Bondi are really just going to do what the president wants. And that, he's very much of a kind of a micromanager in a sense. And, if the president says you're going to do this, they're going to do it. And so, and I think that's kind of where we were at under the Biden administration, where, one thing that was pointed out by the Village Farms and those participants was that the proposed rule to change cannabis from Schedule 1 to 3 was not signed by the DEA administrator. It was signed by the Attorney General, which is very unusual. So it kind of showed that the politically appointed Attorney General stepped in and said, this is what we want to do. Kind of showed that there was probably division within the department. Not surprising though, but and I think that's probably, I'm hopeful that's what we will see going forward, is that, while we may have a DEA administrator that's not so keen on this change, the president has expressed support and knows that this is a politically, favorable thing to do, and can put some thumbs on the scales there.
Now, do you all have, through your organization and other lobbyists, just kind of a sidebar, do you all have the contacts and whatever to even get an audience with Trump or even RFK to get that? And I'm wondering, because here's what I thought with, it seems like what I see already with Trump. He's like, oh, David Sachs, you're the crypto czar. You go run with that. Like he gets someone and he hands it off. Elon Musk, you go do
Mhm.
Doge, and kind of anti-regulation. And I'm wondering if he's going to do that with RFK. Hey, you're in charge of medical. Cannabis is a medical issue. You deal with it. So I don't know but that's a couple of questions, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, we're not. He doesn't have the cannabis industry sitting in the Oval Office, but we do have the president's here in the sense that he understands that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we're very very public industry where everything we do is in the front page of the news, so to speak. And I think that while this isn't something that he cares about deeply personally, understands that a lot of his constituents, including the young male demographic that he was able to really swung the election for him, really does care about this issue. And so I think there is a really good chance that what you described would happen, is that there will be a mandate to move cannabis to out of Schedule 1, and maybe be hopefully beyond that, and get it done quickly. My concern is that it is going to get the getting it done quickly, I guess the last part of what I just said there, that's the tricky part because there are so many other things that are happening that are much higher priority than marijuana policy right now. Even for somebody like RFK who supports the issue, that it's hard to imagine this is going to be a top priority. So that's where the industry comes in, where we need anybody who's has any ties to Republican policymakers specifically or the administration to pick up the phone, call them, really press your member of Congress and tell them to put pressure on the White House to get this done because they need to be hearing from us in order to really kind of move it up the ladder of priorities. Given and it's understandable there are a million other things. This wasn't a high priority for the last administration either, which is frankly why we're having this conversation now in 2025 when this should have been done before the inauguration.
Now, so are the next steps as far as kind of the first half of 2025 kind of waiting on this 90 days and then just really waiting to see who is the head of the DEA and what Bondi does and RFK if he gets in? And
Well, there's a lot of next steps. I mean, that's one avenue. We're putting pressure on the White House directly to just prioritize rescheduling and make sure that whoever is in that position, it's known that this is their mandate is to move this forward and get it back on track. And like I said, we can potentially bypass the hearings altogether. But then there's the whole other track, which is Congress and trying to get Congress to move on, not necessarily rescheduling, but other legislative proposals that are favorable to the industry, the Safe Banking Act, and then ultimately descheduling. And there's a lot of opportunity there. We have a Republican majority on both sides. Leadership's not the most favorable to the issue, but there's a lot of opportunities to move banking legislation, for example, that has nothing to do with marijuana, where marijuana can be attached to that legislation.
well, and you brought up descheduling a couple times, and for cannabis to be pulled all the way off the way hemp was, and I always think of kind of like alcohol. It's still regulated, still got to have an ID, and state regulates it, but it's just off the schedules altogether, which would be awesome. You still feel optimistic that there's a like that would probably take an act of Congress.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, though, I said, under the Biden administration, I said there's no way in hell they're going to deschedule cannabis, as an act of just the administration. But they do have the power to, and I wouldn't put it past this administration potentially to do that. Where they could just say, okay, cannabis is now legal. It's removed from the Controlled Substances Act. I wouldn't necessarily bet on that, but it's not beyond the pale.
Well,
I would say that more likely would be an act of Congress, and it's probably still a couple years out.
and I didn't even thought about that as yet another way to legalization. So we've all been hearing about these executive orders, thousands of them. Is this something that could be an executive order? Yep. Just cannabis Schedule 3.
Yeah, I mean the DEA has the authority to move cannabis into schedule to any of the schedules, and the president can tell the DEA to do that, right? Because the DEA reports through the Justice Department up to the president. So yeah, it certainly could be.
Well,
And
that would be a
and
pleasant
and, and I think
surprise.
they could remove it from the Controlled Substances Act altogether. The reason I thought Biden wouldn't do that is it would cause quite a bit of chaos in that there would be no regulatory framework for cannabis. It would be legal like lettuce all of a
Yeah.
sudden at the federal level, which seems kind of, a bit crazy but in this administration, I think the Trump administration doesn't have any problem with chaos. So, I think it's possible to see something like that. And frankly, we would support a move like that because it would really light a fire under Congress to, institute regulations on cannabis that are, make cannabis legal like alcohol, not legal like lettuce.
Yeah.
But and it's kind of where we're at with hemp right now. Hemp got removed from the controlled substance or exempted from the Controlled Substances Act. And now we have, hemp products out there that are unregulated at the federal, they're regulated in the states for the most part, but not the federal level. And I think it's long past time that Congress regulated cannabis or cannabinoids, I should say, what regardless of where they're derived from, hemp or marijuana.
Could this pot, which brings up another point, the Farm Bill never got past the update with which pulled hemp and CBD off is I'm guessing that still has to be at some point they need to get that back because it doesn't affects all farmers. Maybe would
Yeah.
that be a place cannabis gets a little relief too when they look into this all at one time, maybe.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, there's going to be motion, movement, and there already is movement, especially on the Republican side, to try to just undo the loophole as it's called for hemp, and that's something that I don't think is a wise move. I think what we need to do is regulate hemp products, intoxicating hemp THC products, just like we should regulate marijuana THC products. But that is going to be a big battle ahead, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out because you have allies for hemp and marijuana on both sides, the Republican side and on the Democratic side, and you have some folks in the cannabis and the marijuana industry trying to outlaw the hemp products. So that's again
Yeah.
not us, but that's happening, and that's playing out. So we're going to continue to advocate for regulations and sensible laws that will foster a thriving small business sector and not try to go backwards into prohibition.
No, that's all awesome to hear. And then it is just you bring up just the complexity of all this and all the different parties, and you think they're on one side, but then there's infighting, cannabis versus hemp. Let's talk real quickly about the state level. So there's still and I think we should. The states should keep moving forward. We got Florida, missed passing by 4% or whatever their vote, but I've seen just since, the elections, there've been a lot of state bills coming up and Wisconsin and Texas, Pennsylvania. So there's still states moving forward. Um, is there anything you're seeing on that side? I saw today, Virginia, they're going to pass something again, and the governor's threatening to veto it, but maybe they can overturn his veto.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities still at the state level, and we've got also states that have already passed cannabis reform laws that are still implementing where they don't have an industry yet. So, you have Ohio, you have Minnesota, states like that, while there's not really there's no need for legislation, but the licensing is happening, and by the end of this year, we'd like to see a more robust industries, adult use industries in both those states, which I think will put a lot more pressure on the federal government, especially Ohio. It's a huge state, it's a political linchpin state in a sense. And I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on federal government to make some changes. As far as states with legislation to legalize, I'm pretty optimistic on, and I'm pretty bullish on Pennsylvania. I think some of the others, maybe perhaps Hawaii. Some of the others, I think, have a tough hill to climb. But this is kind of, but that doesn't mean that there could eke out some other victories there. And, we've gotten to a kind of an interesting place where we have so many of the state, we have almost all the states with the ballot initiative process. With, Florida's an exception and, we almost won there. But, for the most part, we're down to states that have Republican legislatures that, that are, and for whatever reason, Republican politicians don't support cannabis reform at the level Democratic politicians do, even though when you look at the voters, there's really no difference. So, that's going to be our job is to make sure they really see where their voters are at and start registering the will of the voters when they're in the state legislatures.
No, I totally agree. And to me, you can like even going way, way back to the internet, the birth of the internet. I think 99.9% of Americans, Republicans, Democrats, Independent, would be like, oh, the internet's a good thing. But I think way back when it was maybe bipartisan. Same with, I look at liquor right now. If you tried to suddenly tomorrow outlaw liquor and said, oh, all the Democrats want beer and wine and liquor and Republicans don't want it, that would be idiotic.
Yeah.
But I guess cannabis is coming a long time out of the trenches. Why don't we kind of wrap up with anything else interesting or that we need to keep a note on? I know it's obviously going to be a super interesting year, um, and we've got this first 4 months. We just there's no end to the news of what's going on day in and day out, um, and Trump definitely operates. Like him or don't like him, he operates on a different level. Every day something's going on. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think keep an eye on Congress. There's gonna be a lot of opportunities to move legislation through Congress not, I don't necessarily, I'm not gonna sit here and predict that Congress is gonna take up a big marijuana bill and push it through to the president's desk. But there's a lot of vehicles where marijuana amendments could be attached along the way that I think have a good shot at moving through. And I think especially on the banking side today. In fact, the Senate, today is February 5th, the Senate Banking Committee conducted a hearing on debanking, which is a term the conservatives are using for conservative organizations losing their banking access because of for political reasons. And we were able to generate a whole lot of attention on that hearing through activating our members to call and email those committee members to make sure that the marijuana issue was brought up. So Liz Warren brought it up today several times during the hearing that yes, this is an issue for legal cannabis businesses. We're losing bank accounts and access to credit card processing. And so it
yeah,
was kind of a way to shoehorn our issue into that hearing. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of other opportunities to do that in the year ahead and in the coming months. I think we're going to see some really good legislation coming out of Congress. It's again not there yet. It's only February, but when look into April and May as we head into NCIA's Cannabis Industry Lobby Days in May in Washington, D.C.
yes, that's going to be awesome. We will definitely be at lobby days again. We're trying for our part at Dope CFO to be involved in NCIA. I know I just got emails recently from two of our Dope CFO certified advisors. I think Marcelo Ocello was on the DEI committee, and Lee Generous is on the Banking Finance Committee. So, and maybe even Erica Sloan. But I know Christie's involved in lobby days, and we're going
Mhm.
to give you a chance. Um, one final thing I said, I know Trump said this out of this kind of side of his mouth. Oh, let's just get rid of the tax code. Well, that would sure benefit the industry if that happened.
Oh, sure.
We not only get rid of 280E, we'd get rid of all
We
taxes.
wouldn't have to worry about 280 anymore. Maybe that's how we get it fixed.
Yeah, so that would be a new way to do it. But yeah, so tell people how they can get involved at the national and state level. And you all have, I know, lobby days. Also, you have these community events, which are awesome. And it's really important for everyone to get involved. Um,
Yeah, if you're part of the cannabis industry, you're serving the industry as a CPA, you're part of a movement, and we need your involvement in order to be as successful as we can. Encourage all of you to go to our website, cannabisindustry.org. You can find out about some events we have coming up. We have an event coming up, a stakeholder summit for California, coming up in Sacramento on April 10th, in Denver, Colorado, April 29th. These are opportunities to hear from the regulators in the states about what's happening, kind of emerging issues there, as well as engage on what NCIA is doing in Congress and in DC. We'll have some pretty substantive updates on what's happening well, let's hope we'll have some substantive updates on what's happening on the rescheduling front by then. And then, as you mentioned, the Cannabis Industry Lobby Days, that's May 13th through 15th in Washington, D.C. This is an opportunity to come together, meet with congressional offices, talk about the issues that affect your clients, you as an operator in the industry, and really help put a face on the industry. And so we really want to encourage all of you to attend those. And of course, at the end of the day, NCI is a membership-based organization. Everything we do is for our members. Our members are running the organization. We're a very open and democratic association, but we need participation. So go to the cannabisindustry.org, join, become a member. We have a 50% off discount for any members of the Dope CFO network. So just go to the any membership option and type in the discount code Dope CFO 50, and you get 50% off. So membership could be as low as $500 for the year.
Well, awesome. Well, I will be pushing this out to all of our members for certain. Um,
Wonderful.
but super excited to have you. And then we will keep following along and have you back as a guest as well. But I feel I'm going to keep optimistic for this year. I think we've all been up and down a little bit. We all thought we were really, really close. And then we thought, I see a lot of people are like completely negative, like, oh, we blew it. But we'll see. I'm optimistic that some good things are going to happen for this industry this year. Um, and we'll just see. But thank you so much for being on here, and everyone will be able to find your links in our show notes as well. Um, and we'll look forward to having you back to our group as well.
Always. Yeah. Thank you so much.